Hey everybody, it's Justin from Built, and today we are doing French cleats. Soup to nuts. I'm giving you all my knowledge on this one. I've had lots of people comment in videos that they want to learn about it, and so here it comes. We are going to talk about the origins of French cleats and their different uses. We're going to take stock and break it all the way down into French cleat strips and talk about the different sizings and cuts we can do, different machines we can use to make it. We're going to erect a dummy wall, and we're going to look at different ways on if we just only applied it to exposed studs or if we put it on a solid wall. And then we're going to look at all the different hanging options, and I'm going to try and share with you my experience, because most things that I have on this wall might be like the third or fourth iteration of a holder, and so there's things that I did when I first started making French cleats that I never do now. And of course we'll talk about, some other things like locking mechanisms and the way you need to change your build in order to accommodate those. So let's get into French cleats today on Built. French cleats are believed to have been invented by French shipbuilders in the 1800s, and they wanted to get their ropes and tools off the ground so that they didn't get wet inside the boat, and they needed them to be modular because as they put in different cargoes, they needed to move their holders around based on how they were packing their space. And that's when French cleats were born. French cleats are two pieces of wood that are cut to the same degree. And one is obviously flipped over so that then when they go back together, they form a complete new solid surface again. And this is a very stable, force-efficient method. And so I'll demonstrate what that is. So this holder right here has a cleat attached to the back of it. And what it does is it creates a triangle pocket in the back. And when you then go to attach it to a wall cleat that is rotated, so it is going in the opposite direction, they perfectly marry back together again. Now, the two cleats come together to basically form one piece of wood again, where all of the forces are going directly down into the center of this cleat. And because the cleat that's on the wall is actually at an angle, it forces it towards the wall as well. So it's very effective in the direction in which the forces are being applied. Now, as you get bigger items, forces then want to cause rotation, which would be to do this. So you're pushing over here. So as long as you have an amply sized cleat, those forces are then just pushing on a piece of wood and it can't go anywhere. If you use an undersized cleat, so like this very little skinny guy, and I put it on here, because it extends so far below, there is the possibility that rotational effects could occur where it's causing the cleat to come off. So using a very skinny cleat, unless you're doing something that's very light, is probably not a good idea. The basic way to think of it from like a physics perspective is if the force going this way exceeds the force going down, it's going to rotate and pop off the wall. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we make these things going forward. There's so many uses for French cleats, whether you're hanging up cabinetry with them. It makes cabinetry so much easier to hang up on a wall when there's a cleat there. Picture frames, or if you're going to do some crazy organizational system like I have in my garage, I find that organized spaces make you feel better and more productive, so that's why I like to do it. And there is a lot of different ways that we can approach this French cleat. I focus on breaking down my material in the most effective manner. So that's how I've decided the size of my cleats. There is no wrong answer here. You can pick something completely different and it's still correct. There are lots of people who like to have very tall cleats. And as I was showing you with that rotational force, that prevents the rotational force. There's lots of people who like to just put up one big cleat up on the wall and put a whole bunch of holders on that, maybe for like shovels and other outdoor equipment. Or you like to put very tight spacing like I do on my walls. The tighter the spacing, the more options you have with your holders to be able to move them around to different spots on the wall. If it's really huge spacing, you're kind of committing to it's either way down here or way up here. So regardless of however your approach is, we're going to move ahead and I'm going to kind of show you how I do my cleats. Now, what I will do with an entire sheet of plywood, if I'm going to do a large wall or something, I want to break it down in the most effective way possible. And so by cutting the entire sheet into 5-inch strips, long ways, I'm going to be able to achieve 9 strips that are 5 inches without any waste. That is factoring into the kerf, that is removing material every time you cut it. So at the end, you should have 9 exactly 5-inch pieces. Sometimes you might end up with the very last one being a tiny bit shorter. And that's okay. When I break it down for the last time to make the actual cleats, I might put the one shorter cleat off to the side, and I'll use that on the back of my holders when I put it up on the wall. It's very important that you do not use a smaller cleat and a bigger cleat together on the wall. They won't match up. So they have to be perfectly the exact same, or else when you put them together, one's going to be taller than the other, and the thing you put on it's going to be crooked. So that doesn't work. So we want to make sure that we only use the exact same size stuff. Now, when I set up my table saw, if I have cut my pieces to a 5-inch section, I will move my fence to 2 inches. Now, 2 inches isn't half of 5. But when you actually look at these, the 2-inch measurement, which is what I'm setting my fence to, is for the skinniest little part. That's 2 inches. When I look at the big part at the other end of my cut, I'm at 2 3/4. When I put 2 of these together, obviously factoring into the fact that I subtracted a little bit for this cut, I come back out to 5 inches again. So setting your table saw to 2 inches will result in 2 perfectly sized pieces that are the exact same height when you put them together, and that's what we want. We have our strips cut to 5 inches. Now it's time to cut them at the 2-inch mark at a 45-degree angle so that we get 2 equal pieces. But I do want to talk a little bit about safety with this. When you angle your blade, you're now exerting additional forces other than what you would typically get when you just run the saw blade through. Now it is also producing a horizontal force that is wanting to send your wood flying this way. And so a very important thing is to use a featherboard if you can. This applies pressure, holding the wood against the fence. And then you need to apply a good deal of downward pressure. Not a sponsor or endorsement or anything, but I do like the Grip Ripper. A lot of the time I feel very stable safety-wise when I'm pushing things through. However, this cut, I cannot put it against the fence in either mode and get that blade perfectly in between. I would have to guess and kind of like put it on the wood before I put it through. And that's a little too risky as far as colliding with this. I actually, the other day, you know, I'm out here on YouTube trying to show you guys the correct way to do things. I spend a lot of time. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I definitely want to put all the safety information out there. So I have a lot of safety stuff in a lot of my videos. And so I'm somebody who's focusing on that, right? I'm not somebody who's just like, ha 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 ha, and doing stuff stupid. So when I was cutting a French cleat for my dado boxes the other day, I used this push stick as I was pushing it through. And I don't know how it happened, because accidents at the table saw happen so quick. You typically are standing there like, what? Like, how? Why? But I guess somehow I collided with the blade and it went kaboosh. And that push stick flew out of my hand across the shop. Luckily, it didn't hurt me. Luckily, it didn't hit me in the face. But this guy is all cut up now at the bottom. It's done. Luckily, it wasn't my finger. But so I just wanted to point that out, that even somebody who's really hyper-focusing on the safety aspect of it can still have mishaps. So make sure you're paying close attention when you do this cut. All right, our first French cleats are done. If I flip them around and put them together, they are exactly the same height and match up. That's good, because we want the exact same heights as we go to install it on a wall. Now, other than the table saw, if you don't have a table saw, there are many other saws that will cut this. Of course, you can use any of your hand saws like a jigsaw or a circular saw if they have a beveling function like this one does. So you would just turn it to the 45-degree or your choice of degree on that one. Same with this one. Even a bandsaw will work too. The whole table on a bandsaw will rotate to the side, and then you can just run it through that way. if you're going to use a hand tool, what I suggest is to either use a guide, of course. This Bora guide will clamp onto your wood, so then you have a straight line to run your saw against. Or if you don't have something like that, just clamp another really straight piece of wood. Particularly maybe a piece that you had just run through something, or maybe it's a brand new piece of wood. Check it for squareness, of course, but you can just line another piece up, clamp it down, and run your saw along that line. Don't freehand this cut. If your French cleats are like this, it's going to greatly diminish their holding power. So if you're going to do it by hand, make sure you use a straight edge when you're cutting. Let's talk about the different ways we can mount our French cleat on the wall. We're going to start off with an open frame scenario. So somebody asked me in the comments the other day, out in their barn, it's not a finished scenario, it just has studs. Can I put French cleat between my studs and will that work? And the answer is yes. I will put an apostrophe on that. There's some considerations you have to make. So if I just grab one of my French cleat holders and I put it on there, it's out in the middle of nowhere, but guess what? It stays and it's stable. So even with this 2 3/4 cleat, something like this was fine. This is a great option for you to put tools and things. Now, if you're using this, let's say to hang a shovel, right? Shovel's really long and it's going to want to go into this crevice behind the tool and the French cleat. I'm going to represent this with this fire extinguisher holder that I have. It's very tall, right? So just like I was talking about in the beginning, there are forces at play, and there are forces going directly down, and that's what's holding this fire extinguisher support up. But it also wants to go this way, especially with the weight that's in here. It's kind of rotating it this way, and so you'll notice this guy bounces a lot. There's a lot of rotation happening, and it's really, really easy for me to pop it. Now, some ways to, actually I'll keep this in there, some ways to combat that. You could put another French cleat or just any other scrap piece of wood in the wall behind it, and you'll notice like I'm not even holding it anymore because that force is pushing there, it's pinching it into place. If you have another scrap piece there, now it doesn't want to move. So adding that support there is one great option. A second option would be to cut a much fatter cleat. And it doesn't have to be this fat, but I wanted to kind of give the illustration. If you have this here, and your French cleat is much fatter, again, we're adding that support behind the actual total length of this thing, and so it doesn't want to move when we're doing there, or at least I'm simulating that, but you get the idea. So go ahead, make a really fat cleat that's going to go across. The main goal is to make sure that you're supporting what you're going to be putting on here so that you don't get that rotational effect. If you're mounting this to just studs, go ahead and use some structural lag screws. Don't use the cheapo stuff. Don't use a nail because there can be some torsion flex in here and it could wiggle the nail loose at some point. So I'd want the extra grabbing power of the threads of the screw. You could choose to glue it, but most likely if you have exposed studs, you might want to cover that up at some point, and so glue might create a little bit more of a problem in the long run. So go for the structural lag screws. Now we have a fully covered wall here. In this case, we're going to more rely on glue to hold our French cleats. And this is going to be a much stronger French cleat than the other style where we just had some screws in it. For this example, I just have some junky wood here. But up on the wall, I actually use 1/2-inch sheet plywood behind all of my French cleats all the way around, and it's actually done phenomenal. Some people out there will say, hey, you need to use 3/4 inch, but I can tell you I got hundreds of pounds up there. I've never had any issues, so I personally feel perfectly fine in telling you 1/2-inch sheet plywood is fine. Mine is 1/2-inch, then drywall, then plywood, then studs. So I can't even get to a stud if I wanted to without using like a 4-inch screw. So for me, it's literally just glued on for the most part to the plywood. Now, for deciding how we're going to do this, there's a couple different methods. One would be to measure and mark on your wall for where you're going to place all of your French cleats. Now, if you do measure and mark, something that you need to focus on is, what is my spacing going to be? In order to determine what the minimum spacing should be, of course you can make it big spacing if you want to, but if you want to keep them close, you have to make sure that they can interlock and come apart. So they need some space in there. So the way that you figure this out is you take your cleat and you put it at a diagonal on another cleat. You do not want to interlock them for this measurement. You want them at a diagonal, and then you measure. And for my measurement, I'm coming out at 5.5 inches based on my 2 3/4 inch pieces of wood. Now, that does not mean I should make a mark at that. I should give it a little bit more space. 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/2 of an inch might be a good idea. That way you aren't limiting yourself and you're not scratching and maybe breaking or splintering wood as you force it in sometimes. So in my case, since I'm here, I might make my spacing from the bottom of one cleat to the bottom of the next cleat, I might make it 6 inches. Even 6 1/4, you know, that's fine too. When you're doing that, the use of a laser level, if you have a rotating or 3D laser level, I'm actually going to be reviewing one of those pretty soon. That is the perfect use case scenario for this, one that has auto leveling. So it would literally project the line all the way across. It'd be really easy for you to line up and just go ahead and tack it in. Now, the next way that you could do this takes a little bit of pre-planning, but I like it. This is kind of the easier way, but it is easier to mess up too. And that is to first level off your bottom cleat. And then what you're going to do is you're going to create spacer blocks. And this is where you really need to focus on time for this, because if you have a mistake in your spacer block, it will exacerbate as we go up the wall. So what I did for my spacer blocks was I made them 3.5 inches. Because when I add it to here, this total height is 6 1/4, so ample spacing. I made 2 of them. I made sure they were perfect, man. Like, I spent a lot of time on these and made sure that they are perfectly 3.5 all the way around. Then I drew a clock on it, so I did 1, 2, 3, 4. That way I knew the sides for these, and I wrote French cleats because I'm gonna keep these permanently, and I'll explain why in a second. So when I'm doing this method, after perfectly leveling this one, and I mean perfectly leveling, because if you don't get the first one right, everything else is bad. You just can easily slap your blocks there. They will stay. You put your next one on, make sure to glue, and then you're going to tack it in at the studs, or, you know, if you have plywood behind there, you can tack it as much as you want to hold the glue in place, and then that's it. You get to take out the spacer block and move it up and do the next one. It's very fast, this method. Now, what I would recommend, I'm very sure I made these blocks perfect, but, you know, let's just be sure. And so that's why we drew the clock on there. You know, some people rotate 1, 2, 3, 4. Other people, it's just flip-flop. So you can go 1 on this one, and then on the other one, 1's going to be pointing down, 3's up. And then I'll do straight up 1, and then I'll do straight down 1. That way, if there is an inconsistency in it, you're removing it each time. You're counteracting it as you rotate the block so that it's the opposite of whatever you did to it incorrectly before. Okay. I'm going to demonstrate gluing this piece of cleat, and I'm going to do that because you really need to put an ample amount of glue on here. And you don't want to skimp, but at the same time, you don't want to get it on the actual diagonal of the cleat. And that includes after you have affixed it to the wall, because if you do, it's going to impede your other cleat from being able to seat properly. So before I put it up on the wall, I made sure to really coat all of this, but then I'm taking a wet towel and I'm running it along the edge and even overlapping some in here because I don't want squeeze out coming in this direction. When I finally do put it up, I'm then going to visually check from the top to make sure that there was no squeeze out. I then gloop it together. Oh, look, there's some squeeze out. How did that happen? Shame on me. I'm going to use the good old straw method where I cut a straw at a diagonal and I'm just going to slide it through there and get as much of that as possible inside the straw. And I might do that a couple times just because, again, if you leave that in there, it's going to create a hump and, you know, it's going to impede the functionality of your French cleat wall. When affixing my cleats to plywood, really glue does the job. And I have walls in here where I only used glue and then I used brad nails just to hold it in place while the glue dried. But over here on this wall, I have a lot of weight from my different clamp racks. So on this one, I did sink some lag screws in on studs just for that extra holding power. But again, on a whole bunch of the other walls, I have no screws in them. It's just the brads and glue. And again, it's really the glue. The brads are just there to hold it while the glue dries. We're down in part of my basement right now. It is not finished, so don't judge me. But this used to be, until recently, my virtual golf suite. I had one of those big projectors with a whole wall that was basically a movie screen that I could hit golf balls into. But I love my sons, and they're turning 13, and they wanted to start lifting weights. So I bought a whole bunch of weightlifting equipment, and so we're finishing my old golf area into workout land for them. So part of that, I made a French cleat wall over here for a lot of the exercise equipment, like hand stuff down here, accessory wall. And what I wanted to point out to you with this was I did a black painted background, and I really like it. I actually really am debating doing that for some of the stuff in the garage or other projects going forward because of how much I like the contrast that it brings to it. And to do this, all you do is paint your plywood first and then apply the French cleats exactly how we did. It only added one step to the entire process, and it was really, really easy. Now, this one, I ended up assembling this flat in the garage. So I painted the panel, and then I added all my French cleat rungs to it while it was laying on the table. So it wasn't even like I had to hold it up and position it and stuff. It made it really, really easy. So that is something to consider. I would probably recommend only doing that if you are doing a section like this. If you're going to be doing a long run, like how I have in the garage, you could end up having a lot of misaligned pieces unless you're absolutely perfect. So I would say don't do the lay down method for assembly unless it's, you know, going to be a small piece. So while I was down here in the basement, I figure I'll show you one more thing French cleat wise, which is part of this bar. Again, don't judge me because this actually is another project that's not completed yet. My wife and I have flip-flopped so many times about fully finishing the basement or leaving it partially finished like we have down here. And so these cabinets are intended to be painted white, but then my Cubert background that I made out of wood, I don't know if I want that white. And we have so many like, I don't know, it's kind of just been sitting here 75% finished. But what I wanted to point out was I used French cleats to hang the upper cabinets. Okay, so we're on the side of my bar, and eventually this is going to get walled in and drywalled, so I didn't care what the side looked like, and that's why it's still out here, but it works for this video because you can actually see how I did this. And up at the very top, there is a French cleat, and I'm going to lift the camera all the way up there so you can see, there's a French cleat on the top, and that is mounted to the top of the cabinet. And then there's a French cleat that's almost poking the camera that is mounted to the studs in there. So when it was time for me to put this cabinet up, all I had to do was just lift it up and set it there, and it was done. And then I could go back and hit it with screws to put it into the wall. Now you'll see that because we have a 3/4 inch French cleat up there, it created a gap. And so once we get down to the bottom here, if I didn't put a piece of scrap wood, this cabinet would go in and it would be crooked and all the stuff would be falling out of the cabinet. So all you have to do is throw in an additional 3/4 inch piece of scrap wood all the way behind the cabinets, And so that keeps the cabinets nice and level. And so this was a really easy way for me to be able to hang up such tall cabinets that are up there very quick and easy with French cleat. The last thing about your wall is, since this piece is going to be up there most likely forever if you're gluing it, or at least for a very long time, I would try and use some nicer wood on here. Now maybe you just don't care and you want to use the cheapest thing, cool, good on you. But you know, just keep that in your mind. This will be what is seen a lot. So this type of junkier plywood I use on the back of items because you're never going to see it. So the stuff that's going to be on your wall, you might want to try and use nicer stuff. Maybe it matters to you that you don't see nuts, so maybe you might even trim it and use it in smaller increments if you want to. That's cool. But I just wanted to throw it out there so it was something in your brain that you would think about before you put it up there. Now, when we're talking about our actual fixtures that we're going to be making, there's some little things that I wanted to put forward out for you as far as design goes. So this is one that I made at some point early on. And it was just throwing scraps together, right? And it was to hold something. I don't even remember. But here are the issues with this design. It is very long protrusion. And watch this. It fell right off. Now, it fell right off because in addition to the cleat, I have no more height to this back plate. You want to have a decent amount of height. Now, this is something that's very similar. It's a triangle shape, so it distributes weight a little bit better than just a stick pointing out there. And it has a much longer or much taller back plate. So this one, even though they're very, very similar, that one practically falls off on its own. This one, when I'm pushing on the very, very end, it is staying put. Now, this still is not a good design, but I wanted to kind of show you a progression of ways to make it better. So this is bad. This is okay. Now, why is this okay and not good? It needs some more width. See how I can do this super easy? I can do that by poking to the side. If I poke this from the side just even a little bit, I can knock it all the way off if I wanted to. So that, in the beginning, I was trying to just use small scraps, use everything I can, not use too much, make my scraps go as far as possible because I didn't want to buy more wood. And I was trying to make as many holders as possible, right? And in the end, that really is oh, here's another horrible, horrible one. I have a drawer full of a whole bunch of these things because you never know if you're going to break them down and try and do stuff. So again, this one is great at holding from here, but oh man, like this one is a third of the width of this other one over here. So we're going to put him over in the really bad section too. So now you move to a bit more of an adequate dimensional size. So this has, 6 to 8 inches of width to it. It's longer than my cleat, but it's not too long. If it did continue to go down, it would be pressing against my next cleat, so it would have additional support. This one, isn't that funny? That one's so horrible. Get it off my table. This one is excellent as far as its holding power on this cleat. And it's because we gave it ample width. At least if you're getting to like 8 inches or so, you are going to have a lot of horizontal stability in addition to your vertical and interior force protection on these guys. So this is a very solid size and design for this. Now, I didn't practice this, so let's see if I not throw all my clamps on the ground as I do this. Oh God, they're heavy. Yeah, okay. Hopefully my clamped cleat will actually hold this here. I don't think, crap. Okay, ta-da, I got it up there, magic. Now, magic, let's take all the clamps off. All right, so magic. This holder right here. Again, this is just a 1 cleat holder. It's not excessively long, but it is longer than the overall cleat that it's on. And even though that was really heavy, I mean, I picked it up while the clamps were on there. There's a lot of clamps on there. It has some weight to it, but yet it is not ripping my cleat off the wall, and the cleat in the back isn't ripping off of it. So I'm very happy with this one. And it's a very simple design. It's just pegs so that I can put out. A triangle design would be more stable, but with the size of these clamps, as you do a triangle, it inhibits them being able to grab, and some of them I needed to actually pinch this thing itself. So the fact that it stays on its own and it's never broken is, you know, pretty good. Now, some items like my dado box are really, really heavy. I have all my hand tools in here. And so it does make sense to utilize 2 French cleats on this one just to distribute the weight. And since I have the height to be able to do that, that's great. Now, when you do that, you would typically mount your top French cleat first, and then you could use the double sticky tape method or measure in order to figure out exactly what you're doing for this second one. But we come back to our stop blocks. So if you do this setup with stop blocks and you keep these stop blocks, it will save you time in the future by being able to put your stop block here for the exact measurement to mount your second cleat underneath. So it removes the guesswork, it removes all the measurement, it removes a whole bunch of stuff. You're able to just take these out, pop them in, and then you have an easy way to mount your second cleat whenever you need to do that. All right, I'm going to review 2 different locking mechanisms for French cleats. There are a million different ways to do it. I'm not saying these are the best. I'm saying these are 2 of the easiest. So it's easy for you to understand the concept. The overall concept in locking a French cleat is making it so that it can't move up because, yeah, it can move side to side, but it falls down when it gets lifted up. So the importance of locking it is to prevent the up motion. So the easiest thing is you throw a spacer block up above it. Now when I whack this thing, it can't move. Congratulations, it's locked in place. Now this is the easiest, simplest method, and there's many downsides to this method, like where does this block go when I need to take it off? You lose it. Sometimes the block falls out, yada yada. But you know, hey, end all very visual description of it doesn't let it go up. Now that takes us to the locking peg method, which is what I use most of the time in my shop. Now you'll notice that on this cleat there is a gap above it, and that's so that I can lift it off. On this one, I continue the backer plate up so that it overlaps with the cleat above it. That is the most important difference. The cleat is not mounted at the top, it is mounted a little lower. What that enables me to do is to take a dowel and stick it in a hole. Now this dowel is too small, but I just wanted to illustrate. If I try to move up, this dowel is wedged underneath that and it will not raise. So let's turn this to the side so you can get a good view of that. Now this is the custom peg that I have actually made for this. What I do is I just take that dowel and then I glue another piece of wood that I crank out on my CNC machine. That way it's kind of like a little knob. It's easier to grab. So when I insert this into the hole, you'll notice that the dowel is now underneath that lip of the next cleat. And so when I attempt to lift this up, it can't move. It's not even wiggling. And that's because I made sure to put this hole directly underneath. Now sometimes, actually it's this one, sometimes when I do the hole, I actually get it a little wrong. So I took my sander to the edge of this one to get it to fit perfectly under there. So this one actually has like a right side up when I insert it so that it perfectly kind of locks in place. It almost acts like a deadbolt if you want to think about it that way. So like I said, there are so many different locking mechanisms, but the overall answer to most of them is that we're trying to prevent upward movement, and so wedging something underneath the next cleat is the easiest way to do that going forward. Here's some examples of some of my French cleat holders. Tape dispenser cleat with hacksaw blades for tearing off the tape. A drip tray for all of my gluing supplies. Easy shelves that catch all the dripping off of those epoxy bottles so that it's not staining my countertops. French Cleat corner shelves. I did a whole video on this, it's linked below. Your holders can be as easy as dowels sticking out of a board to hold all of your really long levels and measuring tools. Here's my new custom hammer holder. I just did a video on this one too, linked below. Of course, there's my dado box series. I did a whole video on these. This is my favorite way to store hand tools. It's super effective and space saving. Let your creativity go with these things. This is a charging station that I made where I charge all my rechargeable batteries and then they go up in the dispensers up above. Of course, you can do decorative Kaizen foam inserts with your French Cleat holders if you like. Or even do stuff like get magnets involved. This is my handsaw holder and there's neodymium magnets in the gaps in between, so when I put it in, it holds it there by magnets. There are so many awesome designs, way better than even what I have and what I just demonstrated for you in the shop. So go out there and join those Facebook groups that do French Cleats and watch other videos. I know there's one guy, that's all he does, is he just posts videos of like, here's my French Cleat design of today. And that's cool. French Cleat is a really neat medium to be creative with. There's so many different awesome ways that you can make tool holders and bit holders, all sorts of things in the shop. So definitely go out and expand your horizons and go watch all those fun things. As maybe like a last tip with all of this, I fell down the rabbit hole with French Cleats at one point. Anything that I bought got a French Cleat holder and it went up on the wall. If I bought an iron for edge banding, it's up on the wall. If I bought a scraper to scrape out a pumpkin at Halloween, oh, that baby's going up on the wall it is like enshrined right there up on my French Cleat system. So maybe keep that in mind and try and limit yourself to your most used tools that you want to have easy ready access to. That's really what I've been trying to do with my setup with my French Cleats, is keep it more to like my everyday or even every week type of stuff, so it's not overdoing it. Maybe that's the way to do it. But you know, some of you, that wall might be the only storage you have and you need to slap as much up there as possible, so I don't fault you for that one either. I hope you will like and subscribe to the channel. We're new. We're only 2 months old. People always get surprised when I say that. I know I got over 50 videos out there, but I'm trying to crank it out. So your likes, subscribes, and comments tell the algorithm, hey, pump this guy up. So I appreciate all of that if you do that for me. And as always, stay safe in the shop. I'll see you in the next video.